Good morning, and thank you all for your involvement in today's event, for your significant engagement and your time this morning. We have been thrilled and delighted with the phenomenal response to what is clearly a topic that is top of mind for us all right now. And of course, we recognize a key reason for your response is the quality of our three panelists, who are all recognized as industry leaders and subject matter knowledge experts. Our first speaker this morning is John Moran, who is CEO of Jones Lang LaSalle Ireland and Head of Capital Markets. John is a leading specialist in property investment and has transacted on over 15 billion worth of assets in his career to date. In his role as CEO, John is responsible for the strategic direction of JLL in Ireland. Next, we have Dr. Frank O'Donnell, who is a key member of Microsoft's leadership team in Ireland. Dr. Frank has over 20 years experience across the public sector with a particular focus on technology, strategy, and digital transformation. And he has worked in the UK as well as the Middle East in areas such as health, education, economic development, and local government. And Theresa Daly, who is a culture and strategy design specialist and principal of Wilfield Consulting. Theresa has worked with many major brands, including IKEA, Microsoft, and closer to home, IDA and the NTMA, amongst others. Theresa is known for many things, but one of her key accomplishments is the recent transformation of the workplace of one Microsoft place in Sandyford in Dublin. So I want to again thank you and recognize the contribution in advance for our speakers. This is intended to be an interactive session, so there is a chat function to the right-hand side. If you click on the chat, if you have any questions at any point, please enter them and we'll pick them up. Once the speakers are finished, we will have a Q&A, which should be in approximately 15 to 20 minutes time. So I now want to hand you over to Peter Fox, Director of Digicom and MC for our event today. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. 13 months ago, guys, we were in situations like what we see on the slide below. We were in a situation where we could see each other's body language and we could pick up on people's non-verbal cues. Our next slide shows where we've got to over the last year, where we've got a pair of our eyes looking at a gallery of eyes, and ourselves as well. And our next slide shows that now we're becoming quite fatigued with this methodology of communication. We've got video conferencing fatigue. We've got people complaining of burnout because of workload and because of screen time. So our next slide shows where people want to get to, where employees want to be. And it's clearly a bouquet, clearly a blend of learning. It's clearly what we call the hybrid model, where we can obviously learn and interact socially with people in the workplace, but also have the comfort of our home to do single tasks and not to have to face a commute every day. So we want to blend. So our next slide introduces the speakers. It's a three-legged stool. John will talk about the physical workspace that we need to look at in order to be able to address this hybrid model. Frank will discuss the collaborative technology that parallels with the physical and agile workspace. And very importantly, Theresa will talk about how our people will adapt, how the culture and the values of our business needs to change in order to embrace this new norm. John.
Thanks, Peter. At the outset, I apologize for my voice. I've got a strep throat, so I won't be my normal loud self, but I'll do my level best to get the various points that I have to make come across. If you want to move on to the next slide, Brian. Corporates are asking a lot of questions currently about their real estate portfolios. They're starting to plan for their new office futures. Themes that come out of those questions above are hybrid, workplace technology, workplace design, and that merging of CRE and HR. the use of the corporate real estate and how it interacts with the human resources department is probably the biggest change that we're going through at the moment. And to move on to the next slide. This slide goes out of date every time I do it. I was saying to the guys earlier on, yesterday, KPMG turned around and said everybody was going back to the office. Citibank said everybody was going back to the office. And then there was 2 Silicon Valley software companies saying that nobody was going back to the office. Those are the results of a survey that we've done of 160 corporate clients around Europe. So it's the Googles of the world, it's the Facebooks. And what it says is, in the short to medium term, there'll be a minor rationalization in the use of office space. 84% of those surveys say there'll be some impact on how their portfolios will be adapted and used in the medium to long term. And when we say impact of CRE, that's basically space reduction or otherwise. So all of this has impacts. If you want to move on to the next slide. All of this has impacts on corporate real estate. So we have a hybrid future. So remote work is here to stay. The question is how it's integrated and optimized. The pandemic has proved a concept of remote work at scale. However, it's presented employees and companies with challenges as well as benefits. Ultimately, the change will go far beyond real estate, incorporating corporate strategy, operating models, and organizational design. 2021 will see organizations evaluate and integrate distributed working models for the longer term. Worker-centric strategies, i.e. looking after all the workers, will have to be carefully balanced against enterprise performance goals. A spectrum of approaches will emerge, from work from home evolving to work from anywhere, as greater freedom of movement and mobility return to the economy. No matter where anybody lands on the hybrid spectrum, real estate portfolios will need to transition. Health will become as paramount as occupiers think about touchless and contactless equipment within buildings, social distancing, and there will be an enormous focus on well standards for employees. The race to zero carbon will continue to intensify as sustainability gains a huge focus on the ESG and CSR agenda. We think at JLL that this will be one of the biggest changes that will happen over the next 2 to 3 years. The greening of buildings is a juggernaut that's not going to stop and requires significant improvements in the construction industry and significant improvements in how we approach our buildings. Technology has been changing about how we go about our business over the last 20, 30 years, but it's been catalyzed in the last 12 months. It's propelled the focus on technology further into the radar of occupiers who'll be looking for the best technology and applications within their buildings. So in order to get people back into the office, companies will be forced to think about their space over and above the actual physical real estate and it simply being a building to work in. The top spaces will boost employee experience. Going to work will become an experiential occurrence for a lot of people, where in order for people to get back into the office, it's going to have to be worth their while to do so. It's interesting. One of the reasons why most of the big tech companies haven't opened their offices at the moment is the fact that they want their employees to be able to experience work properly, so they don't want people going into half-empty offices and not enjoying that experience. Latest data from our human experience employee survey shows that remote work will probably double post-COVID, going from 1.2 days a week on average to pre-pandemic to probably 2.4 days a week. 24% of employees will want to work exclusively in the office, while 50% are asking for a new hybrid approach. 26% are keen to work exclusively outside the office, and how you marry that balance will reshape how corporate real estate portfolios for many companies will develop going forward. Cost versus value is something that we're always asked. Is this just an excuse to cut cost? Most people don't recognize that rental costs represents approximately 10% of any corporate's outgoings in terms of their expenses. We take the view that as salary is probably upwards of 70% of your expenses, you're better off investing in that 10% of cost to make sure that you deliver a return on investment on your 70% cost base. So it's a balance. There will be some corporates and companies out there who will go for it and just use this as an excuse to cut costs, but on balance, we don't think that's going to happen. We just think people will have to drive further value from their real estate. Sorry, excuse me. Going to move on to the next slide, Brian. So what are the investor implications for this? So the people who are building the buildings, the developers and the owners, will there be a big reduction in net office demand? What are the key assumptions that we're making? We think that the increasing focus on health, wellness and the employee experience will drive demand for high quality smart buildings. At the start of the pandemic, many sensationalist and clearly far too simplistic headlines pointed to home working leading to the death of the office. My head of research sent me an article this morning from 1996, which glorifies the end of the office and the office will be over. I've heard it many, many times. I've been around a long time. We certainly don't think that this is going to be the death of the office. We've seen major swings in corporate sentiment and their strategies and their thinking towards the future of the office. But the one thing that has been a constant is that the large-scale remote working experiment has forced companies to put value out of their office under the microscope. Underwriting that value add in terms of collaboration, innovation, talent attraction and retention, health, well-being, learning, has meant that companies now look to the future of the work with the physical office at the heart. But what shines out of it is that only best-in-class offices will do. 7% of corporates are only looking to reduce grade A space, while 50% are looking to increase their investment in high quality space. So what does that mean? Demand in European office markets is likely to gravitate towards high quality assets, smart and sustainable buildings that can support a company's environmental, health, wellness and employee experience initiatives will be in high demand. And those assets will come at a premium. They'll be more expensive in terms of rent, but they'll be far more resilient in terms of value during a downturn. An interesting feature that we're also seeing is as companies move along the corporate social responsibility agenda, their ability to be inward looking and not participate in communities is changing. So we're now starting to see people looking to externalize some of the amenities that they've had in the past that have been within their offices. So there's very interesting work going on with LinkedIn up around Wilfield Place at the moment, where other than normally traditionally occupying internal offices with all their amenities inside, they're actually going to actively support external cafes, external restaurants, so that the full placemaking experience can be there for both the occupiers of the building themselves, but they're also giving something back to community. Now I can move to the final slide. This is perhaps a little bit esoteric and may not resonate with everybody on the call, but the flex offices were the darling of the market from about 2016 to 2020. Not unsurprisingly, 2021 is going to be a very tough year for those operators. But I think there's a misconception out there that flex offices are dead, that we won't see flex offices developing further into the future. In fact, we think the complete polar opposite is likely to happen. What will happen is, as smaller firms go out of business, people will start up again. They'll require flex offices. They'll actually get to the stage where they'll want to go back in, probably in a lot of cases, perhaps changing locations as well, maybe a slightly more greater focus on the suburbs. I don't think you can learn a lot from how you actually run your own business as well. And what is not unusual, I had a call yesterday from somebody saying to me, I need a room, our office is shut, you can't go in at the moment, so can I go and get a room in WeWork? And that will become the norm. Somebody will say to themselves, I'm working from home, I need to be able to have access to proper office facilities for a morning. You'll be able to go off, get that, and literally book it on a per time basis. So in the longer term, we think that flex will continue to be an enormous part of corporate portfolios, still running at about 20% of their space, and that there'll be high demand for it. So I'll draw this to a conclusion. I said that the office is not dead by any stretch of the imagination. The office is only evolving. In my career, I've never seen the office as center in terms of how you run your business. It is the area for branding, it's the area for collaboration, it's the area for training, it's all the things that I've said before. So in order to meet that, the spaces will change. The days of rows of desk after desk will eventually be gone. The days of people just coming in, sort of plonking themselves in their corner, putting their flag on their desk are gone. It'll be flexibility, collaboration, which means that we'll have to address innovative design sooner rather than later. It will be touchless. I have absolutely no doubt that that will be the case. Simple things like the quality of your air will become the most important detractor in your office environment. That needs to be measured. So technology will pervade everything that we do. Technology will tell us how we use their buildings. And with that, I'll segue into Frank, who's going to actually give you a far more informed view on technology than I can. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. And well done, John, for getting through that. I know the challenges with the throat are pretty severe for you. So, and some really interesting insights on the physical environment for sure. And thank you to Greg and Digicom for the invite. Greg pitched this as a sort of informal get-together, fairly intimate gathering maybe a few weeks ago. It's turned into something a little bit bigger than that. And I think actually the interest in this is, you know, it's part of the overall interest in this evolving situation that we're in. And we're all very much in learning mode, I think, in this still, to understand how we need to adapt and evolve, particularly post-COVID. So I'll talk a little bit to the digital side of this, but also refer to some of the studies that we've been doing. One of them just released in the last few days, and some of the trends that we're seeing coming through from our analysis. And I'll also touch then at the end of some of what it means for the solutions that we're bringing through in this area. So I think it was touched on by Peter, but the hybrid world is inevitable and will be part of the future environment for us as employees, as managers, and as leaders. You know, management expects 65% to be in a hybrid world, and within that 18% to be fully remote post-COVID, and that's coming from a European survey of about 9,000 employees and managers. 4 key areas are coming through for us in a lot of the research. The first one is on productivity. Now, quite a few questions about productivity and how to measure it and what we're seeing in that whole space. But 80% of people believe, of the managers and leaders believe that productivity is good. And 50% believe that productivity is greater in a hybrid environment. So that's quite significant. And I think there are challenges on the other side of that in terms of what demands is placing on the workforce, and I'll touch a little bit on that in the following slide. The second area is, go back to the previous one, but the second area is the whole area of talent, about attracting talent and retaining talent. Which is a big issue for companies like Microsoft. But this is opening up opportunities for those in other locations that they would not normally have if they're able to work in a hybrid or a remote environment. So somebody who may be working in, let's say, a beautiful location like the northwest of this country may have access to the kinds of companies like Microsoft and others where they're adopting a hybrid model. And we've seen in our surveys that over 40% of people are considering moving from their employer in the next year. So one thing this COVID has done is, you know, it's got people thinking about where they want to be in the future and what they want to do. And within that, over 50% see the ability to work either remotely or in a hybrid environment as being key to their selection of their future employer. So you can see how important this is for companies like ourselves to continue to attract and retain the right kind of talent. The other area is sustainability, and there are lots of analysis being done around this. I'll just mention one by Boston Consulting Group, who did some work with us, that if 1 in 20 workers in Europe worked 2 days a week at home, it would be the equivalent of taking 5.6 million cars off the road. We know sustainability is on the boardroom agenda. We know it's very topical and front of mind for leaders. So anything that can be done to assist in the whole sustainability argument is going to be quite important as we go forward. And the final area is cost savings. And John touched on some of this. We see that something around 40% of employers see the opportunity to reduce cost, whether that be overhead, whether it be office space or moving offices, but also employees can realize cost savings in terms of where they may work for and their living costs. However, it's not all good news. If we move on to the next slide, the point on productivity, I think, has to be balanced against the demands we're placing on the workforce. And this analysis comes from our analysis of the use of our platform globally. So it's a report that's been published in the last few days called the Work Trends Index. And within that, we see the number of emails delivered in February this year in comparison to February last year is 40.6 billion increase. We see in the use of meetings on our platform, on Teams, that has more than doubled in terms of the time used per week in meetings online. So that's placing significant demands, and Peter talked about fatigue in that sense. We do see here a reduction around the Christmas time in terms of the use of the tools, but I guess we can assume that people were moving to online shopping over that period and still on a digital platform. But this is important for us to understand as managers and leaders in terms of how we best set up the workplace for people so that we mitigate those challenges of exhaustion. If we move to the next slide, there's one other point I want to bring in terms of the challenges that may happen from a digital environment. We see a shrinking of networks. So the green line is the bonds or the connections within a core team. And over the COVID period and on digital platforms, those connections have actually increased. So we teams becoming closer together. However, their interaction with other teams in the organization and indeed outside the organization has weakened. And I think that lends itself to the potential for groupthink. It also impacts on the opportunities for innovation and bringing new ideas into an organization. So quite a challenge if we don't understand that and take steps to mitigate that. So for us, we'll move to the next slide, and we've looked at this whole area of employee experience. So obviously we do this research to understand how best we can support people in these environments. We see 6 key pillars here of great employee experience, from empowering people correctly, allowing them the opportunity to grow, ensuring they're in an organization with a sense of purpose, facilitating the right level of connectivity amongst the team and a team culture, looking after people's well-being, so providing them with tools to understand where they're spending their time and how they can manage their well-being better, and also the ability to focus, the ability to deliver and understand how they deliver on results for the business and for the organization. So that takes us to the final slide to touch on what's coming down the track from a Microsoft perspective. And this is work in progress, I guess. Some of this is already in the market, some of it coming to the market later this year during the summer, where we're building a layer on top of our existing Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Teams platform to support this employee experience and building on that research. Areas like connections and ensuring that team culture, on areas like topics and knowledge and expertise sharing, the formal learning environment, and particularly on insights, which is available now. And those insights, an example of those is that you can run simple analysis on what you've been doing or what your team has been doing over a period of time to understand if you're spending enough time focusing on core tasks, if you're interacting externally, if you're taking care of your well-being, if you're taking time out, or if you're working much long beyond hours. And you can see what your team are doing as well and try to support your team and enable them to manage this type of environment in a better way. These things are all supported by artificial intelligence to guide you on how to improve over time. And I think this will be an important part of our platform as we go forward into the post-COVID era. So I think that gives you hopefully a sense of some of the work that we've been doing and something that's happening on the digital side. I'll now hand over to Theresa, who's going to take us into the very important area of people and culture.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Good morning, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here this morning just to share with you, I suppose, some of my thoughts and insights around the whole topic of culture. And I guess just to start, I just want to share with you, I suppose, what I mean by culture. you know, and not to confuse culture with values. I think values are very much about how you define the character of your organization. It's about what you stand for. It's about what you believe in, you know, and values tend to be static. They don't change over time. Whereas culture is much more about the way you implement your values. You know, it's systemic and it permeates every part of the organization. And you know, and you see it in how leaders turn up. You see it in how you communicate, how you manage team meetings. You see it in a collaboration. So culture, I think culture is really, at the end of the day, it's the result of the behaviors that are encouraged, discouraged, or tolerated in an organization. So when you think about it, then culture is always evolving, you know, and it is always moving, and it moves kind of at a normal pace. But then significant events happen, you know, and that really shakes up culture. And when I think about the last year, you know, all of us have been through a tremendous change. And from a workplace strategy perspective, I just want to focus for a few minutes on the personal, I suppose, side of change that we've all been through. And I think from a personal perspective, I think, you know, a lot of us are reprioritizing what's happening from the perspective of what's really important in our lives. I thought what Frank shared with us there, you know, is really interesting. You know, people are reconsidering, you know, their work life, and they really are starting to think about, you know, what if I can work remotely and that gives a better lifestyle for myself and my family. So I think that's quite an important consideration. I think the other thing to think about is that whilst we're all going through this storm together, we are in very different boats. There is no doubt about that. Some people seem to be thriving, other people are really struggling. So when you're thinking about your workplace strategy and thinking about the design of the workplace, which we heard about earlier, I think it's not just about where and how to do tasks. I think you have to layer in the personal circumstances of each individual in your team, and you have to ask that question about what has changed. So I think the personal level is a new area that we really have to consider and think about. And I think the second thing that has really, you know, shifted culture is the unexpectedness of the change. I mean, when you think back to last March, you know, Friday we were working in the office, and Monday we were all literally video conferencing. You know, so it was a lift and shift strategy, and nobody had time to redesign, nobody had time to think through. And I think that was fine at the time because, you know, we all thought it was going to be for a few months. But moving on, you know, we're a year down the road now, and I think there is no possibility to revert back to the culture that we had a year ago. And I think now it's time that leaders really have to respond and really have to think about culture as we move forward. Frank, if you just move on to the next slide. And I think there's a huge onus on leaders. I mean, at the end of the day, leaders are accountable for culture. Culture is led from the top. Leaders set the tone and they steer the culture. And I just want to highlight a few things that are making this more challenging when we think about workplace strategy going forward. I think the first thing is, when you think about culture, you know, it really is about what you do, more so than what you say. It's really about the behaviors, and that has always been very visible in an office environment. And I think in addition to that, you know, our structures, our systems that underpin the culture of an organization, whether it's performance reviews or whether it's feedback sessions, all of that has been designed in the context of the office. So there is a challenge there for leaders, I think, to rethink all of the systems that we have in place and rethink it from the perspective of a hybrid workplace. I think that the second challenge, undoubtedly, is that, you know, we have new expectations of leaders. Over the last year, we've seen some key characteristics such as empathy, you know, generosity of spirit. We have seen real honesty in that it's something, you know, we're going through together. We don't have all the answers. And I think we've seen a really change in the level of transparency of communications. And these are characteristics that are really important going forward, and they're characteristics that we want to see more of. And I think also there's an expectation on leaders, you know, that they know how to manage this distributed workforce. But I think there's a skill there that has to be supported in understanding how to lead and how to manage and how to build trust in a much different environment. And the last challenge that I would highlight for leaders, and it's a challenge that's always there, and it's about how do we think about how to balance our focus on delivering results and fostering the right culture. And that's become even more challenging now, because I think understandably, you know, we want to get back into business, we want to get the business back on track. But if you tip the balance too much in favor of delivering results, I think your culture is really going to suffer. The level of employee engagement and motivation will take a nosedive, and this will really have negative consequences on the organization. So I do think there's a number of challenges for leaders, and leaders have the accountability to figure out how to steer the culture moving forward. And I think that leads us into the question about, well, you know, how do you build and sustain a culture across the office and people working remotely? So Frank, if you just move on to the next slide, please. So there's been a lot of research work done, and the recent report actually that Frank mentioned there by Microsoft is a really good report to read. But there's a bunch of other reports out there, and when I look at them from an employee perspective, you know, the same concerns are coming through over and over again. And those concerns are around connection, around collaboration, and around career. So if we just talk about connection, and I think connection is really about, you know, how do you build that sense of belonging, which is, you know, relatively, I suppose, easier to do in an office environment. But we have to figure out how to do it in a distributed workforce. And it is really important because, you know, it is the foundation of good, effective collaboration. Collaboration is an interesting one. And again, it was brought up there in the Microsoft study and supported in a number of other research work that our networks have narrowed. And of course, that has a huge impact on how we exchange ideas, on creativity and innovation. So again, we have to build in new mechanisms to ensure that innovation continues. And the third area that I mentioned there is around careers. And this is a particular concern actually for those younger in career. And the other aspect that's been highlighted is learning and development. And when we think about it, you know, up to 70% of our learning and development happens on the job, and it happens with our peers. So again, we have to think about creative ways as to how we ensure that learning and development continues. And I think in all of this, there's a risk that we could end up with an office culture and we could end up with a remote culture. So again, there's an exercise and a thinking to be done as to how you bridge the gap and ensure that you do have an overall organizational culture. And this is where inclusiveness is critical. You know, and I think even coming through the pandemic, you know, that whole sense of fairness and equity has really been highlighted. And all of this, you know, is under the umbrella of inclusiveness. So again, I think a really important area to think about. So I suppose just to conclude, I would say be intentional, you know, invest time in your culture strategy. And when I talk about culture strategy, you know, I'm saying, you know, go through the process, come up with the 2 or 3 culture priorities that will really motivate your staff and that will help you deliver your business plan. I think it is really important, particularly given the change that we've gone through over the last 12 months. So with that, I'll hand it back to Peter for the Q&A session. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Theresa. So thank you very much, panel, for that. 3 really interesting conversations around embracing the new norm and the hybrid model. So we're getting a lot of we've got a lot of people in, and we're getting a lot of questions in. Just to remind those that want to have a question, it's the chat function up in the top right hand corner of your screen. There's 3 dots there, and you just press on the chat function, and if you submit that in, we'll ask the panel if and when we get a chance. I guess Theresa, you touched on it, and the area. One question that's come in is around trust, but also security. So there's 2 questions that have come in. I suppose one is for Frank, really, is that how do you ensure a secure environment exists around sensitive data in a hybrid model?
Well, actually, Peter, this is something that where we've been focused on for many years within the platform that Microsoft provides. So everything we do and any solutions we develop start from a security perspective, and we invest something over $1 billion a year in the whole security aspect of the platform overall. So the solutions that we bring through and the solutions I talked about are sitting on top of an enterprise-grade platform, an enterprise-grade security platform. So things like identity, access, the ability to allow people to view certain data and not other data, all of that's managed through a secure platform, and all is managed on a cloud technology. The other thing, though, is that you still need your internal security policies. You need to design your own security infrastructure from your own organization's perspective, so that you decide who has access to what over a digital platform. But I think there are things that are the same regardless of whether you're working remotely or in an office environment. You're often in an office environment using the same digital tools. So as long as you're operating on a strong enterprise-grade platform, then I think this is all manageable within a remote environment also. And I just go to Theresa's point about the office culture versus the remote culture. In that digital world, the security of the office infrastructure is the same as the security of the remote infrastructure if you're sitting across an enterprise platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have one in for John, who's struggling with the strep throat, but it's so sorry about this, John. But as the greening of buildings accelerates, what do you think will be the impact on so-called secondary offices, which in this person's view is the vast majority of the office stock?
The person's probably right as well. I think you'll see, and we're already starting to see it, a polarization between prime with proper ECG credentials associated with it and secondary. It'll be led by occupiers. So occupiers will only take buildings which meet certain sustainability criteria. That'll be written into their own CSR. If you take Frank's company as an example, they will only take buildings that are up to LEED Platinum standard. So the occupier will drive it, and as a consequence, there will be a lot of retrofitting of buildings required. And in a lot of circumstances, the secondary buildings at the moment simply don't have the physical infrastructure that's necessary to enable them to get to the standards that are now required. So rather than seeing whole-scale refurbishments of buildings, I think you're actually going to see a lot more buildings being knocked down and completely rebuilt.
Okay. This is from Fiona O'Connor. Just Theresa said, choose your 3 actions to motivate staff and bring business results. Could she give a sample of types of things she means, please?
You're on mute, Theresa.
Yeah.
All right.
Apologies. Yeah, a really good question. And I think, it really is dependent on the organization. But what I'm talking about, for instance, if you think about culture priorities, you know, it could be, a priority could be, how do you build those integrated teams? Because that is a challenge at the moment with people working remotely and people working in the office. So that might be one of your focus area. Another focus area, and we've talked about it a lot, is, you know, how do you leverage technology? So that could be a focus in terms of building that up. You know, another focus is how do you create that sense of, I suppose, accountability in a hybrid model? So it really does depend where you're at as an organization. But I think the most important thing is that you just focus in on 2 or 3 things. You know, for somebody else, if there's a real shift in the business model, it could be around customer experience or building customer relationships in this new digital world. So I think what's more important here is that, you know, you take your business strategy and you look at, from a cultural perspective, what will best support your business strategy and what will best motivate employees. And I think very often I see, you know, companies and organizations come up with a really great business strategy, but forget completely about the culture strategy. And I think one of the key drivers of your business strategy and an absolute critical ingredient is that culture strategy that you focus on. So a bit of a round, it is not a direct answer because I think it's very dependent on the organization, but I would start with your business strategy and look at how best then your culture can support that.
Okay, yeah, and kind of segueing into that, sort of Andrew Donoghue asked a question here about do we think the hybrid model could change seasonally? I don't know what the panel's view is on that. Anyone like to take it?
That's an interesting question.
Good question.
I don't have an answer, but I can say that the levels of adoption of hybrid will vary across industry. There's no doubt, and we see that already. And we also see globally, we see a variation. So we see the Nordics, for example, Denmark's very much a leading country in terms of the use of remote and hybrid for many, many years. So we see differences, and that may relate to culture as well, or it may relate to the actual infrastructure. So in India, there are some challenges around available infrastructure. But I haven't thought about this being seasonal, and as we all come into spring and summer, maybe we're all going to be a lot happier with this hybrid environment. Who knows?
Yeah.
If I can come in there, Peter, you know, it's a great way to think about it because every business has a pattern, you know, and I think that pattern will be replicated whether it's digital or remote. So if you take retail, I remember working, you know, when I worked in IKEA, our season really from a volume perspective was September, December, and that was everybody was on the shop floor. So I don't see that changing. You might have to do it in a slightly different way. But I do think thinking about the seasonal patterns of the industry you're in is really important. I think it's a well-cut observation.
I think it almost operates at a per week basis at the moment. There's a noticeable, we've operated flexible working in our business for a couple of years. There's a noticeable difference in attendance in the office between Mondays and Fridays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. And I can only imagine that would be exacerbated in the summer.
Indeed. Just on that point, John, just there was talk about mind gardens that developers of new offices are going to have to look at street labs and mind gardens and hub and spoke. I mean, how do you see that happening, or where do you see the outputs of this world going with that?
I think it goes back to the point that I was making during my presentation. Increasingly it's about placemaking, and it's not just the building. It's the associated amenities with the building. If you travel through some of the better developments in London at the moment, they're generally ahead of where we are. And the quality of the placemaking, a move away from just pure sort of sterile office buildings to more mixed use type of development is what I think. So, and mixed use can mean a lot of different things to many people, but it's really trying to get that sort of blend and amalgam of maybe some residential alongside some offices, so you breathe constant 24/7 life into a location. With hub and spoke, the jury's out in hub and spoke at the moment. I think again, it will suit certain type of businesses. Touching back on Frank's point, certain businesses it will suit. Like, I mean, certainly from talking to a number of the banks here, I think they'll favour some elements of hub and spoke where they have staff with long commuter times who don't necessarily need to be in head office, but still need that collaboration. So they'll give them pods to be able to work together. But it's developing. So I think ultimately, I think it'll probably be better for the suburban office markets insofar as they'll probably have a greater demand than they have at the moment.
Okay.
Peter, just to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, it's 9:45, just conscious that we said it would be a 45-minute session, and if the questions are continuing in, if the panelists are happy to hang on and people are happy to hang on the call, please feel free to. If the conversation is flowing, we're happy to let it flow. But we obviously understand, we hope you've got a lot out of it so far. I want to also briefly thank Brian from Digicom, who has been in the background, and Cecile on the marketing side for our event, just in case we close off without saying that. But what we're saying is because of the interest in the event, we are looking to create a second follow-up series event to this, perhaps in late April, and hopefully you'll find it as engaging. But we'll continue on, Peter, for now.
Yeah, there's about five more minutes here. So just there's a question here from Bob Hoffman. Again, it's just sort of, but in recruitment, the vast majority of candidates are looking at 3 days at home, 2 days in the office. Post-COVID, what does John feel about the increase in satellite hot desk offices outside of the main urban areas?
Probably to an extent just answered that question, but I mean, yes, I think there will be, depending on the business. I think that's critical for people to understand. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer to anything here. It doesn't suit different types of business operations. Like, I mean, but I think I hesitate to use the word back office tasks, but where back office tasks can easily be undertaken in one, cheaper locations, two, in a manner that doesn't impact on the overall operation of the business, I see no particular reason why people won't sort of move towards that model. So yes, I think there will be an increase in it, and that's sort of touching back on why we think that flex space will actually return. It'll suffer during the course of the next 12 to 24 months, but people are able to offer that flexibility. And in terms of recruitment, I totally agree. If you can offer that flexibility to somebody, they're more likely to choose you as an employer than somebody else.
Just going on that, Peter, one of the challenges I think is it's not just 3 and 2, let's say, on an ongoing basis, but it's the onboarding is a big challenge, and we've onboarded a lot of people over the last 12 months, and it's been difficult for them to get to understand this. Back to the culture point from Theresa's perspective, difficult for them to understand the culture and be part of that culture and to become embedded in that culture. And I think we see the future for our offices, and we've got some great offices for sure, but we see people coming to the office to get together, people coming to the office for more collaboration, for more working together, not coming to the office to sit at a desk, for example, on your own. That's the split that we see going forward between the types of work that you do remotely and the type of work you would do in the office.
Mm-hmm. The second question, Frank, is kind of possibly around the trust piece, and it's around the collaboration technology, and it's just so our parents went to their factories and they clocked in and they clocked out, so productivity was quite straightforward. So in this new hybrid model, and keeping into account what Theresa has talked about, the culture of trust, how do we ensure that the technology kind of help us in making sure that everything's getting done?
Well, the short version is that it can, but on its own, it's not sufficient to really address the trust question. The trust question is part of the culture, and to an extent, if you feel you need to have people present in the office and physically see them doing what they're doing, that maybe points to actually challenge on trust. But there are a lot of types of tasks that you can see whether the results are being delivered or not, what location they're in. You can easily see whether those results have been delivered or not. But I'd hesitate to say that the tools will allow you to develop that trust. They can give you signals as to what's going on. They can certainly also signal where you've got the exhaustion point, and that's the point that we see is more relevant than anything else at the moment, is understanding where people are working too long hours or spending too much time in meetings, whatever it may be. But the tools can give you indications about what's going on, but trust is a much wider concept to be built up as part of the culture.
Okay, so it is, and if I can just build on what Frank is saying there, you know, I think the tools can help, but you know, at the end of the day, it's a shift in attitude, it's a shift in mindset. You know, and you have to shift your thinking to, it's about the results that are delivered. It's not about micromanaging how the person is doing their job, and I think that's one of the areas that needs to change. And it is quite a big shift, because we're used to seeing people in the office, and you know, you check in with them and have a 2-minute chat about how they're getting on and what they're doing. That doesn't become as easy if somebody's working remote, so you have to more focus on the results that are being delivered. And give the people ownership, you know. But to support that, then I think you really have to build up a real clarity around, you know, what you're expecting the person to deliver. I think that's really important. And then I do think managers just have to spend time checking in with people. You know, it might be a 10-minute conversation. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes or 1 hour. So there are a number of elements that I think you need to build up, and a number of activities to start building that really core strength of trusting in a team. Okay.
Probably the last question, Theresa, is directed at you. It's like, in your workplace, have you noticed an increase in the stress and anxiety levels of employees over the last few months?
Yeah, I've noticed a few things. I mean, one is definitely people are rethinking. You know, we're reflecting on what is really important in our lives, and we're thinking about, you know, how can we create a better work life for ourselves, you know. And I've seen that talking to people, but I've also seen people make decisions to move jobs, and you know, the survey results bear that out. A big factor is the ability to be able to work remotely and cut down on the whole commuting side of it. And I think stress levels, you know, are very personal. I think we really have to take time to listen to people and to show that we really care. And I think that generosity of spirit needs to continue, because some people are seriously struggling. You know, they're struggling because of isolation, or they're struggling because of, you know, they're caring for elderly parents, or they're trying to school young kids and they're not set up. The office isn't set up. They don't physically have a place to work at home. So I really think it's very individual, and I do think it's really important to get an understanding of where each individual on your team sits on that spectrum. Because, as I said, you know, we're all going through the storm together, but we're in very different boats.
Yeah, and look, it does look like we're going to come out of it sort of, you know, come the autumn. You know, it looks like it's interesting, John's point about there's no point in coming back to empty offices, that we do have to have a reasonable amount of people there in order for people to have the learning experience and the sociability going on.
Yeah, and I do think the office is really critical, because there's a lot of activities that need to happen in the office. They simply can't happen remotely. You know, you think of collab, you know, think of, you know, connection and connecting with people, and you know, that happens in a social environment, because the workplace is a social system.
Indeed.
I think we should appreciate that. Yeah.
Indeed, and we're all looking forward to it, getting back to a bit of social activity and a bit of learning and staying relevant. So look, I'd like to, again, Greg has already, but I'd like to thank our three panelists, Frank, John and Theresa. It was very insightful. I found it very, very beneficial, and thank you for that. We got a huge amount of attendees, and we've got further questions which we may try and answer directly back with people. But
yeah, please do.
10 o'clock, so I'm just conscious of people's time and they want to move on to other bits of the day. But thank you again, and we're going to send out a survey to everybody just to see what they felt about this particular webinar, and any thoughts they may have about us doing another one, what they may want to see. So look, thanks everybody, and
Lovely.
stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
See you. Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Well done.
Likewise.
Thank you. Same, John. Take care.
Thank you.